I'm working for UNHCR. According to our statute, we are strictly non-political, pure humanitarian. It is argued that after the Security Council, UNHCR is perhaps the most politicized United Nations agency. We have to work under extreme difficult circumstances, as the situation in Europe today shows. Hardly a day goes by, or we see images on TV, we read articles in the newspapers about the refugees arriving here in the most deplorable conditions. The other day I turned on the TV and I saw in the middle of the night families with children who were screaming up to here in the water, in the ice-cold water, in Europe. And then realize that these same people first had to cross the Mediterranean in rickety boats or even cross a desert under extreme difficult conditions. So far this year, 500,000 asylum seekers have reached Europe. 3,000 of them, at least that's what we estimate, have died. There's a perception here in Europe that we're overwhelmed with refugees. But you probably don't know that 9 out of 10 refugees are living in the south. They're not in Europe. In the countries surrounding Syria, in Turkey, for instance, or in Lebanon or in Jordan, there are 4 million refugees. An equivalent number in Holland would mean 4 million refugees. And yet, Lebanon is coping with it. Now, obviously, there are very, very, very big challenges, and UNHCR is aware of these challenges. But Europe has a very, very important obligation to fulfill. Why? Because ever since UNHCR was established 65 years ago, Europe has always supported us. Not only Europe, but the United States and countless other donors. And whenever a country in the third world was thinking of abandoning asylum, and perhaps they had more reason to do so because they were so poor that they couldn't even feed their own people, it was Europe that stood up and advocated on behalf of the refugees to keep the borders open. And now that Europe is all of a sudden confronted with such a sizable number of refugees, panic breaks out. Europe is divided. On the one hand, we see the most amazing things happening in Sweden and in Germany. We see a consensus building with regards to the relocation of refugees that arrive in Greece and Italy. For the first time in history, 160,000 people are going to be divided all over Europe, which is a magnificent gesture. There are also negotiations currently going on with Turkey. And I must say, when I saw the President of the European Commission almost crying the other day on TV, I thought, this is the best thing that can reflect the feelings in Europe. But there's also a darker side in Europe. Some governments are building fences in order to keep the refugees out. It's nonsensical, because you don't keep refugees out by building fences, because refugees are in dire need of protection, so they find an alternative way to get out. It's only done in order to satisfy domestic political perception. And then, of course, there's the role of the media. The media plays an incredible, important role, because you probably don't realize it, but the overwhelming majority of Europeans really, when they see these terrible pictures of refugees, want to help. Who can forget when this little boy was washed up at the sea in Turkey? This spontaneous outpouring gesture. Tourists who were on holiday started to provide emergency aid to refugees that arrived. People who never thought of refugees decided to offer their rooms and boarding because they had seen for the first time something tragic like this. And in other places, toys were handed out and candy was handed out. But it is because of negative reporting, and it is because of the politicization of the refugee question that the whole attitude can change. And unfortunately, this is something that we're now seeing in Europe happening. One has to be very, very careful, in my view, because asylum is sacrosanct. It is something that can only occur in a civilized environment. And UNHCR is working extremely hard, day in, day night, to preserve asylum. But we're not only lobbying, we're not only playing an advocacy role on behalf of the refugees, we're doing much more. Did you realize that in some of the Greek islands, we're with 120 relief workers? I have a friend who worked there on that island, and he said he's doing exactly the same thing in Greece that he did 6 months earlier in Tanzania. But this is Europe. How is it possible that UNHCR, a protection agency, a relief agency, has to help European states in order to cope with an influx of refugees? Through Central Europe, we have deployed hundreds of staff. We are paying NGOs in order to help with keeping refugees alive. How on earth is that possible, and what is required to change that? Well, unfortunately, I do not have the answer to this particular question. The only thing that I can do is, on a night like this, appeal to all of us to keep the borders open for genuine refugees. I thank you very much.